Hello and welcome to the European Development Days in Brussels for this new edition of Talking Europe. More than half the money spent throughout the world on helping developing countries comes from the European Union and its member states. But while few will question Europe's generosity, some are calling for an overhaul of Europe's policies when it comes to international aid. What should be changed? What should be kept? What is working? And more importantly, is there a risk that the financial crisis will have an impact on Europe's international aid? This is the question I will put to my guests who have joined me on this set here at the heart of Brussels, starting to my left with Kristalina Georgieva. It's a pleasure to have you on our set. You are the EU Commissioner for Humanitarian Aid, so your mission is to react to emergencies. It's the case in Syria at the moment, it was the case in Haiti, it was the case in the Horn of Africa. Also on this set, coming from Senegal, Victor Ndiaye, you are the president of the consulting company Performance. So your mission is to help governments develop Africa. You believe in your continent. You said that one day Africa will be the locomotive of the world.
Right.
And also on this set, last but not least, Eva Joly, you are a French MEP with the Green Party, same color as your glasses, but we also know you as an anti-corruption judge, and of course you are the member of the EU Parliament Committee on Development.
Yes.
I will start with you, Kristalina Georgieva. You are here all together to discuss Europe's international aid policies. You want to make it better, more effective. Is it effective at the moment?
We have learned very important lessons. That development assistance works when it is owned by the countries and the communities we are trying to help, when it is targeted to address poverty but also generate growth and jobs, and when it is accountable, when we have systems in place to make sure that money go for the purpose intended. And yes, our assistance delivers results. Hundreds of millions of people have been lifted out of poverty because Europe was and is there to help build roads, provide clean water, make cities more livable, build health systems, get kids in school. And it is good for the countries, but it is also good for Europe, because then we have more equitable planet, we have more stability, more security, more demand for European goods.
Victor Ndiaye, what is your message? You are from Senegal, but you're active throughout Africa, helping business develop. What is your message to the EU when it comes to development aid?
Well, I think there have been a big effort made, and Africa is doing better and better with that effort, but the impact is probably not enough, and the potential is much greater than what we see. With the crisis today, everybody recognizes Africa as one of the potential major sources of growth for the world, and with its population, its natural resources, its big need for infrastructure, its middle class growing, the trends are favorable for profitable investments. But that potential needs to be unlocked. And the question is,
what is locked? Tell me, what is locked at the moment? Why isn't that potential able to materialize?
Well, unlocking that potential is really being able to create jobs, companies that solve all the needs of millions of people. And the critical key to that is the private sector. And the private sector today is very weak. And the key question is really how to unlock the potential of the private sector to increase that development.
Eva Joly, do you agree with this? Because the bottom line of the question is, does aid provide development? In a word, can you teach a fisherman how to fish? That way he will bring a lot of fish and you won't have to help him anymore.
Well, I first of all want to say yes, to answer your question, but yes, aid helps. Due to aid, girls are going to school in Afghanistan. Due to help, children are being vaccinated all over the world. And due to help, we are really also helping building states. but it is not sufficient. And also because we have not been clever enough to have coherence for development. We are fighting poverty, we are fighting hunger, but at the same time, in our countries, in the developing countries, we allow land grabbing. 220 million hectares has been taken away from Africa, from the poor people, and we have created hunger, and that is for our multinationals. You see, we have taken the fish away from Senegal because we have allowed European fleet, but also a Russian and Chinese fleet to overfish in their waters. This is lack of coherence, and also because other multinationals have not paid their due taxes using transfer prices and tax havens. So aid is terribly important. We should not stop the help, but we should work also on these other issues to make the world a more sustainable place.
Kristalina Georgieva, is that your view as well, that we give indeed, but we take away so much that at the end that it's not a win-win situation?
My impression is that the world has become richer, and some of this wealth is actually not wisely used. And there we need to be thinking on issues like more equality, equality within countries, equality across countries. If I may, 3 points. One, as a humanitarian commissioner, I am on the receiving end of what happens when development fails. The misery, the tragedies
in the Horn of Africa,
in the Horn of Africa, Somalia, a failed state. What Somalia, the famine there told us is, we cannot afford to have a failed state anywhere, not in Somalia, not in Congo, anywhere. And that means that looking for use of development assistance, it must focus on fragile states. 2, climate change. We worry about the economic crisis, but I'm actually much more worried about the climate crisis. That is the biggest challenge of our generation. And of course it hits who? The poorest countries, the most vulnerable people, the hardest. Again, for Europe, very important for us to continue to lead on the climate change agenda, but also work with countries on resilience to more frequent, more devastating shocks. And this is what we do in Europe. And if I may, 3, to agree, private sector. Private sector can be a big driver of growth. But if it is clean, if it is accountable, and that we need to make sure is there.
And precisely because you say we need to unlock this potential, you want to see the private sector play its role in society. But for this, you also need the help of the governments. Now, you work with African governments on a daily basis.
Right.
Tell me frankly, are you happy with the way they deal with development? Do you think they have a clear strategy to promote development across Africa?
That's really the key issue. I think the question is how policies are designed. We cannot anymore design policies from outside or from experts coming from outside. We cannot design policies to please the donors. I mean, how can you explain that the environmental code in Senegal, which needs to industrialize, is much stricter than the World Bank's? How can you explain that in the small stock exchange in Abidjan, in West Africa, to get there for a company is much more difficult than to get in the New York Stock Exchange? Those cut and paste policies designed outside have proven quite inefficient. And I think it's everybody's responsibilities, the donors and the countries. But for me, the primary responsibility is from the local leadership. It's up to them to define a clear vision, articulate strategy plan, and strict monitoring of execution. And that should be the platform to work with the donors.
Eva Joly, you wanted to react to this?
I think we quite agree on this. We are designing strategic plans for countries with them. We are not doing that ex post. We are not imposing on them. So ownership has been important for years. We have maybe not been clever enough in failed state to adapt to these particular needs, but now we have a new program for failed state.
And precisely because you were mentioning the fact that the world is getting richer, but inequalities are growing, and as a rule, the number of people who suffer from hunger, from famine, has risen. It's
Yes.
reached 870 million people, according to the UN. This is, of course, a huge problem. How can you, Kristalina Georgieva, when you design these policies, how can you make sure that the money, that the help arrives in the hands of the people who need it, not in the hands of potentially corrupt regimes?
The critical issue here is to what extent we engage those who benefit from projects to be those who make sure money is well used. Accountability bottom up is the best accountability. I have seen projects in which a very simple measure, a board in the middle of the village where it is written what money has been received, what the money is going to be used for, who is responsible, is the whole accountability framework, and it works. So making sure that beneficiaries have voice, and that means democracy, inclusion, civil society that delivers accountability bottom up is our best friend. And also listening to the countries. We have a great story with Malawi. 2005, a country that suffered from hunger. They were among those who were producing more and more hungry people. Made a decision that they will have focus on small-scale farmers, would give them cheap fertilizers so they can produce more food. Maize production skyrocketed. 2010, Malawi is exporting, actually not importing food. And now we have a program that just was signed by my colleague Commissioner Peebles for agricultural productivity in Malawi.
In Malawi. Mr. Endia, you said that copy-pasted solutions don't work for Africa. You want clearly the relationship to be changed. Maybe it looks too patronizing to you. I don't know. You'll be able to tell us, of course. What needs to be changed quintessentially here in Brussels to understand Africa better?
Well, I definitely think there is a need to go towards more locally designed and tailor-made policies. I heard that there is a support, and there are some countries with which EU is designing their strategy with them. I think that's not enough. They should design their strategies. What does with them mean? When we look at the EU rules, EU works with European experts, European consultants. That's part of the rules. Now, you have today experts on the field, people like myself or my company, consultants who have worked for years in global consulting firms in the world, who have decided to go back to Africa and to help the transformation of African economies. Those people, because they went back, cannot work with the EU because they are not around in Brussels doing lobbying. Now, there is a need to work more with local experts. There's a new generation, there are new innovations there, and I think that would help a lot adjust the impact of aid.
I totally agree. And we are doing it.
Good.
We are doing
Good.
it. We actually, the EU has learned this very important lesson, that domestically, locally grown solutions are the best solutions. And we actually have untied. We are on the front line of untithing our assistance.
Right.
So indeed, that can be done.
Good.
Valerie, you mentioned earlier that the EU is working on new policies for Africa. I guess the aim now is to really focus on those countries that need the help more than others. You don't want to help countries like China as much as it's done at the moment, but rather focus on African countries that really need, I guess, the help.
Yes, we will focus also on failed states or states that are in huge difficulties because of conflicts and because we know that there is no development without security, for instance. So if you do neglect the security part, you will have no development. Because when you look at development assistance in many countries, it has not worked because we were not attentive enough to the security question and not attentive enough to what we should request from private sector when they were allowed to operate, especially in the mining sector, for instance. So I think we have learned a lot of lessons, and I think today also with the new influence of the parliament that allows to be more proactive with society, to take up the ideas that are modern, we do a better work. And I really want to insist that development works. It's good value for money. And if we are not taking care today of what happens in Mali, that will give worse conditions for everybody in Europe. So that we are in the same boat. And this is not only a moral lesson, it is also an economic issue.
And of course, EU countries have pledged to spend 0.7% of their GDP on development. So far, only 4 countries, I believe, including Sweden, the Netherlands and the UK, have met those standards. You're hopefully calling for more assistance from Europe. Very briefly, Kristalina, as we're running out of time.
We must do more. It is a moral imperative. Otherwise, 450 million children will die from malnutrition. But it is also a financial imperative. The more we do in development, the less we will have to do to respond to crises and disasters, and we would live in a more secure world. But if I may say to the citizens that support us, to the governments that support us, thank you for your generosity. Makes a difference, dramatic difference for the most vulnerable people, gives hope to societies that are at the brink of collapse, and it is good for us in Europe.
And it's now my time to say thank you as we're running out of time. But Kristalina Georgieva, Eva Joly and Victor Ndiaye, it was a pleasure to have us on our set here at the European Development Days in Brussels. And please stay with us on France 24. We'll return after a short news break. We'll look at the results of the EU summit that was held this week here in Brussels.